What would you do if you were just a housekeeper, an invisible, overweight woman, in the home of the most dangerous man on the Eastern Seaboard, and you saw his new fiancée torturing his little girl in the dark? When Mira Ellison made that forbidden phone call, her bloodied hand shaking so hard she nearly dropped the phone, she whispered 4 words into the receiver. "Please come home now." She knew it could mean her death, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment the front doors blew open and he walked in. To survive inside the Marchetti estate, you had to learn how to disappear. For Mira Ellison, invisibility was both a survival tactic and a physical impossibility. At 250 pounds, Mira was a woman who took up space in a world that demanded she shrink. Her black housekeeping uniform pulled tight across her broad shoulders, the buttons straining faintly with every breath, and the thin fabric of her apron bit into the soft, thick flesh of her waist as she moved through the endless marble corridors of the Boston mansion, her breathing heavy, her thighs chafing beneath her skirt. She was 29 years old, soft-spoken and painfully aware of every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, every drop of sweat that beaded along her hairline when she carried linens up the grand staircase. But Mira had one advantage. People like Camille Voss did not see her as a human being. They saw her as furniture. Camille was Alessandro Marchetti's new fiancée. She was a socialite, with a waist the size of a wine-glass stem, platinum hair that fell in a silken sheet down her spine, and eyes the color of ice on a lake that had never once thawed. She had moved into the estate 3 months earlier, bringing with her a wardrobe of imported silk and a quiet, venomous cruelty that seeped into every corner of the house like a slow poison. And then there was Alessandro Marchetti. Alessandro was not a man you looked in the eye. As the head of the Marchetti syndicate, his business was blood, territory, and silence, and he wore the weight of that business the way other men wore cologne. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with a sharp jawline shadowed by permanent dark stubble, and he carried an aura of such contained violence that the air itself seemed to grow thinner the moment he entered a room. Yet beneath that terrifying exterior, there remained one single pulse of humanity left inside him. His 7-year-old daughter, Sofia. Sofia was a frail, quiet child, hollowed out by grief since the car bombing that had taken her mother 2 years earlier. She rarely spoke above a whisper anymore, preferring instead to communicate through crayon drawings she hid inside the lining of her pillowcase, and she spent most of her days folded into the heavy velvet curtains of the East Wing, as though she were trying to become part of the fabric itself. Mira loved that little girl, with a ferocity that frightened her sometimes. Because Mira was large and soft and warm, Sofia gravitated toward her, the way a cold hand gravitates toward a fire, often burying her small face against the curve of Mira's stomach. When the house grew too loud, with the sound of men, Mira was never permitted to look at directly. Mira would sneak Sofia extra pieces of warm bread from the kitchen. She would sit with her in the pantry after hours, reading to her in a low voice, while the business of the syndicate happened behind the mahogany doors down the hall, a business Mira had trained herself never to hear. But Camille's arrival had shifted the fragile ecosystem of the house, and it had shifted it violently. "You dropped crumbs on my rug again," Camille said one afternoon, her voice pitched with the false gentleness of a woman commenting on the weather. She stood in the doorway of the dining room, a glass of deep red wine dangling from 2 manicured fingers, her white silk robe grazing the marble floor. "Honestly, I don't understand why Alessandro keeps you around. Pity, probably. Men like him need something to feel superior to." "I'm sorry, Miss Voss." Mira knelt to gather the crumbs, heat crawling up her neck. Camille's cold eyes swept past her toward the doorway. where Sofia stood clutching a stuffed rabbit against her chest. Something dark flickered across Camille's face, a flicker Mira had learned to recognize and dread. "And you," Camille snapped. "Stop staring at me with those pathetic, buggy eyes. Your father isn't here to coddle you right now." Sofia flinched and shrank back into the shadow of the curtains. Mira's heart twisted violently inside her chest. She wanted to step between them, to shield the girl with her own large frame, the way she had 100 times before in her mind. But fear held her in place, like an iron hand around her throat. If she lost this job, she had nothing. If she crossed Camille, she might end up disappeared entirely, the way certain people in this house were known to disappear. When Alessandro was home, Camille performed the role of the doting stepmother-to-be, with terrifying precision. She would stroke Sofia's hair in front of him, though Mira had watched more than once as Camille's nails dug hard enough into the girl's scalp to leave faint red crescents behind. Alessandro, exhausted from running an empire that stretched from the Boston docks to the piers of Providence, desperate for some semblance of a healed family, saw only what he wanted to see. "Watch over my girls while I'm away," he had told Mira 2 nights before. Everything fell apart, standing in the foyer, buttoning his overcoat, his dark eyes cutting straight through her in a way that made her chest tighten. "I need to trust someone with Sofia. Always, Mr. Marchetti." Mira had meant every word of that promise. She had absolutely no idea how brutally it was about to be tested. The nightmare began on a Thursday. Alessandro was summoned to New York for an emergency sit-down with a rival family, a meeting he expected would keep him away for 48 hours. His head of security traveled with him, leaving the estate guarded only by low-level muscle, stationed strictly along the perimeter fence, men under strict orders never to set foot inside the house itself unless summoned by Alessandro or by Camille. The moment the black Escalade disappeared down the long gated driveway, the temperature inside that house seemed to drop. Camille's first act was to dismiss the cook, the groundskeeper, and the 2 other maids, claiming she wanted a quiet, private weekend. She kept only Mira. "Someone has to scrub the baseboards," Camille said, sipping a martini at 10 in the morning, her cold eyes crawling over Mira's heavy frame with open disgust. "The manual labor will do you some good. God knows you could use the cardio." Mira swallowed her pride whole and tied on her apron. But it was never the scrubbing that worried her. It was Sofia. By early afternoon, Camille's mask had slipped entirely off her face. Mira was on her hands and knees in the hallway, sweat soaking through the collar of her uniform, when she heard a sharp cracking sound from the next room, followed by a small, terrified whimper. She pushed herself upright too fast, her knees screaming in protest, and rushed toward the doorway. Camille was standing over Sofia, with the girl's sketchbook torn in half in her hands, the one small object Sofia used instead of words. Colored pages fluttered to the floor like dead leaves in autumn. "I told you to clean up your mess," Camille hissed, grabbing Sofia's thin arm and squeezing until the child's knuckles turned white. "You spoiled, disgusting little brat. When I marry your father, you are going straight to a boarding school in Switzerland, and you will never see him again." "No," Sofia cried out, tears streaming down her pale face. A hot surge of adrenaline finally cracked through Mira's usual timidity. She stepped into the room, her large frame filling the doorway. "Miss Voss," Mira's voice came out louder than she had ever allowed it to be in this house. "Please, she's just a child. I'll clean up the crayons." Camille whipped around, eyes blazing with an aristocratic fury that seemed to make her taller, though she stood a full head shorter than Mira. She crossed the room and drove one sharp acrylic nail into the center of Mira's chest. "Did I speak to you, you fat pig?" Camille stepped fully into Mira's space, You are the help. You are nothing. If you ever interrupt me again, I will tell Alessandro you were stealing from the safe. You know what happens to thieves in this family, don't you, Mira? They lose their hands." Mira's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at Sofia, sobbing silently on the rug, and understood with terrible clarity that if she was thrown out tonight, this little girl would be left entirely alone, with a monster wearing a woman's face. "I'm sorry." Mira lowered her head, tears of humiliation pricking at her eyes. "I'll go back to work." Pathetic. Camille turned her back with a contemptuous flick of her wrist. "Sofia, go to your room. No dinner. And if I hear one sound out of you tonight, I will lock you in the cellar." For the rest of the afternoon, Mira worked herself to the bone, her mind racing in frantic circles. She waited until she heard the heavy click of Camille's bedroom door, until the second bottle of wine had been opened, before she slipped into the kitchen and prepared a small plate of sliced apples and bread, hiding it beneath a folded napkin. Moving as quietly as a woman her size could manage, she climbed the back stairs and found Sofia curled into a tight, shivering ball at the back of her closet. Mira wedged her large body into the narrow space and pulled the tiny girl into her lap. "Shoo, sweet girl. I brought you something to eat. You have to keep your strength up." "She says, 'Daddy hates me too,'" Sofia whispered brokenly, taking a small bite of bread with trembling fingers. "That he wishes I died with Mommy instead." Something inside Mira's chest went cold and still. This was not simply cruelty anymore. This was calculated. "That is a lie, baby. Your daddy loves you more than his own life. He just doesn't see what she really is." The bedroom door crashed open against the wall. Camille stood in the frame, swaying slightly, a half-empty wine glass dangling from her fingers, her face twisted into something that no longer resembled a socialite at all. "I knew it." She slurred the words, eyes darting from the food to Mira's face. "I told you. No dinner. Are you deaf, you oversized whale?" "She was hungry, Miss Voss. It's just a little bread." Camille's hand struck Mira hard across the face. The heavy diamond ring on her finger caught Mira's cheek and tore the skin open in one clean, vicious line. Blood welled instantly, hot and shocking, dripping down her jaw and staining the white collar of her uniform. "You don't make the rules in my house." Camille grabbed Sofia by the hair and hauled the shrieking child out of the closet. "Stop, please." Mira scrambled up, tripping over the rug, crashing hard to her knees. Camille dragged Sofia down the grand staircase, heels clicking violently against the marble. The little girl coughing now, wheezing, her chest heaving in a way that Mira recognized instantly. Sofia's asthma, always waiting under the surface, always triggered by exactly this kind of terror, had begun to close her airway. "She can't breathe." Mira's voice tore raw as she scrambled to her feet and chased them down the stairs, her thick thighs burning with every step. "Miss Voss, please. She needs her inhaler." Camille yanked open the heavy iron door of the subterranean wine cellar and shoved the sobbing, gasping child down the first few steps. Mira threw her entire body against the door, trying to wedge it open, but Camille was fueled by wine and adrenaline and slammed it shut with brutal force, catching 3 of Mira's fingers in the frame. Mira screamed, yanking her hand back just as the heavy deadbolt slid home with a sound like a gunshot. "She stays in there until morning." Camille dusted off her hands, a triumphant, sickened smile spreading across her face. "And if you try to unlock that door, if you so much as look at the guards, I will tell Alessandro you attacked me. Who do you think he will believe? His beautiful future wife, or a fat, pathetic maid who can barely tie her own shoes without breaking a sweat?" She leaned in close, her breath thick with vodka, You're fired. Pack your things and get out of my house before I have you thrown out." Camille turned and walked unsteadily toward the living room to pour herself another drink, entirely unaware that she had just detonated a bomb with no way of ever putting it out. Mira pressed her ear to the cold iron. At first, she could hear Sofia crying, muffled and small. Then the crying changed. It became a high, horrible wheeze, the unmistakable sound of a child fighting for every breath. Sofia's inhaler was upstairs, in the drawer beside her bed. Panic sliced through Mira's veins, cold and sharp as broken glass. The only key hung from the master ring in Camille's pocket. The perimeter guards would not enter the house without a direct call from Alessandro or Camille herself. Mira looked down at her bleeding, throbbing hand. She caught her own reflection in the polished steel of the refrigerator door and saw exactly what the world had always told her she was. A frightened, overweight housekeeper with a split cheek, a woman who had spent her entire life making herself small enough that no one would ever have to look at her twice. Not tonight. Mira ran. She bypassed the back stairs and sprinted for the main staircase, her lungs burning, her heavy footsteps thudding against the floorboards with a force that sent vibrations up through the soles of her feet. She headed straight for the one room in the entire house that was absolutely, unforgivably forbidden. Alessandro's private study. The door was locked. Mira did not care. She backed up 3 steps and threw her full weight into the solid oak. The frame splintered but held. She stepped back again, let out a raw, primal sound she did not recognize as her own voice, and slammed her shoulder into the wood a second time. The lock gave way with a crack like a rifle shot, and Mira tumbled into the dark, leather-scented office. She knew, from years of dusting these shelves, that a single black emergency phone sat in the top right drawer of the desk. A phone that bypassed every layer of security and rang directly to Alessandro, no matter where in the world he stood. A phone that existed for exactly one purpose. Touching it without permission was, by every rule of this house, a death sentence. Her bloodied fingers shook so violently, she nearly dropped the phone twice before she managed to press the single button on its keypad. It rang once, twice. "Speak." Alessandro's voice, cold and flat and already dangerous, made Mira's blood run to ice in her veins. Behind him, she could hear the chaos of a New York street, men shouting, horns blaring. "Mr. Marchetti." Mira gasped, blood and tears mixing freely on her face. "It's Mira. Please, you have to come home now." She locked Sofia in the wine cellar. "She's having an asthma attack, and I cannot get to her." "She'll destroy her, Mr. Marchetti. She'll destroy her." There was a silence on the other end of that line, so complete, it felt like the entire world had stopped breathing along with her. Then, in a voice gone suddenly, terrifyingly calm, the exact kind of calm that comes directly before a massacre, Alessandro spoke. "Get away from my desk. Go back to the kitchen. Wait by the cellar door." "But you're in New York." "Do exactly as I say." The line went dead. Mira stared at the phone in her bloody hand, uncomprehending. New York was a 3-hour flight. Sofia did not have 3 hours. She did not have 30 minutes. She wiped the blood from her cheek with the back of her sleeve and ran back down the stairs, her heart pounding a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. As she passed the living room, she saw Camille sprawled across the white sofa, laughing into her cell phone, entirely unaware that she had just triggered a nuclear detonation. Mira threw herself against the cellar door. "Sofia, hold on, baby. I'm right here." Silence. No more wheezing. No sound at all. No, 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 No. Her voice cracked as she struck the door with both fists, useless against the unyielding iron. God, please, no. She turned, fully intending to march into the living room and rip the key from Camille's pocket with her bare hands. Consequences be damned, when the entire front of the house shook. A deafening crash tore through the foyer, followed instantly by the sound of heavy boots hitting marble. Camille's laughter from the next room cut off mid-breath. What is the meaning of this? Camille's voice rang out, and then dissolved into a scream of pure, unadulterated terror. Mira rushed to the kitchen doorway and looked out into the grand hallway. The heavy mahogany front doors hung splintered off their hinges. Standing in the wreckage, flanked by 4 armed men, was Alessandro Marchetti. He was not in New York. He had been 20 minutes away the entire time. His dark eyes locked onto Camille, who was backing toward the wall in horror, her wineglass slipping from her fingers and shattering against the marble in a spray of red that looked, for one sickening second, exactly like blood. Alessandro did not say a single word. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and let it fall to the floor, and began to walk toward his fiancée with the slow, deliberate weight of an approaching storm. He did not run. He stalked. And with every step he took, the temperature inside that house seemed to drop 10 more degrees. The cellar. Mira pointed a shaking, bloodied finger toward the kitchen. She hasn't made a sound in minutes, Mr. Marchetti. Please. Alessandro's jaw clenched hard enough that Mira could see the muscle tick beneath his stubble. He turned to Camille and simply extended his open palm. The key. Alessandro, you don't understand. She was being a brat. She was disrespecting me. And this insolent maid attacked me. His enforcer, a broad-shouldered man with a scarred jaw named Nico, did not wait for permission. He grabbed Camille by the collar of her robe, slammed her against the wall, and pulled the heavy brass keyring from her pocket, tossing it through the air to Alessandro without a word. Alessandro caught it in one hand and moved toward the kitchen with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size. Her inhaler is in the bedside table upstairs, Mira shouted after him. Nico was already taking the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. Alessandro shoved the key into the deadbolt, twisted it, and ripped the heavy iron door open with such violent force that it slammed back against the brick wall, hard enough to chip the mortar. He plunged down into the freezing darkness of the stairwell. Mira, right behind him, flicking on the light switch with a hand that would not stop shaking. At the bottom of the stairs, curled into a small, motionless ball, on the cold stone floor, lay Sofia. Her lips had gone a terrifying shade of blue. Sofia! Alessandro's voice tore out of him in a sound of raw agony that Mira had never imagined a man like him capable of making. He dropped to his knees on the freezing stone, gathering his daughter into his arms, with hands that trembled for the first time Mira had ever seen. Breathe for me, baby. Breathe. Mira lowered herself to her knees beside them, ignoring the shock of pain that shot up through her legs on the cold stone, and pressed 2 fingers to Sofia's throat. There's a pulse. It's weak, but it's there. Her voice dropped into a low, commanding register she did not know she possessed. Lay her flat. Tip her chin back. We need to open her airway. Alessandro looked at her, his dark eyes wide with a raw vulnerability no one in his entire organization had ever been permitted to witness, and did exactly as she said. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Nico appeared with the small plastic inhaler clutched in his fist. Mira snatched it from him. Hold her jaw open. Alessandro obeyed instantly, and Mira pressed the inhaler between Sofia's lips, pumping it twice, leaning her heavy frame over the child to press gently against her chest, forcing the medicine deep into her lungs. For 3 unbearable seconds, nothing happened. Then Sofia's small chest hitched violently, and a raw, wheezing gasp tore out of her throat, followed by a fit of coughing. Her eyes flew open. "Daddy." She cried the word, and it broke apart in the middle. "I'm here, baby. Papa's here." Alessandro crushed her against his chest, burying his face in her hair, his broad shoulders shaking with something Mira suspected he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Sofia turned her head weakly and found Mira's eyes. "Mira." Mira leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to the girl's forehead, her own tears mixing freely with the blood still drying on her cheek. "I'm right here, sweet girl. You're safe now." Alessandro stood, lifting Sofia effortlessly into his arms, and then he looked down at Mira, who was struggling to push her heavy frame up off the freezing stone floor, her knees popping in protest. He extended his hand to her. Mira blinked in surprise. No one in this house had ever offered her a hand for anything. Tentatively, she placed her bruised, bloodied fingers into his palm, and he pulled her up with an ease that startled her, steadying her firmly on her feet. "Nico." Alessandro's voice returned to its familiar, low, deadly register as they climbed the stairs. "Yes, boss. Take Camille to the harbor warehouse. Tie her to a chair in the freezer unit. Let her feel exactly what cold really means. I will deal with her personally once my daughter is asleep." Camille's shrieks echoed through the mansion as Nico dragged her toward the door, and then, abruptly, the heavy front door slammed shut, and the house fell into a silence that felt entirely different from before. It was the silence of a kingdom that had just been violently, permanently purged of its poison. 2 hours later, a private doctor had come and gone, Sofia sedated and sleeping soundly under a thick blanket, Alessandro sitting motionless at her bedside, his face an unreadable mask carved from stone. Mira retreated to her small quarters off the kitchen. She washed the dried blood from her face, changed into an oversized sweatshirt, taped her bruised fingers, and sat on the edge of her narrow bed staring at the wall as the adrenaline finally drained out of her, leaving behind a deep, aching dread. She had broken into the boss's private study. She had used the emergency phone reserved only for syndicate matters. Under any normal circumstance, both offenses were punishable by a bullet. A soft knock made her jump. "Mira," one of the guards spoke through the door. "Mr. Marchetti wants to see you in his study." Mira closed her eyes, took one long, shuddering breath, and stood. "This is it," she thought. "At least Sofia is safe." When she reached the study, she stopped in the doorway. The heavy oak door hung shattered off its hinges, splinters littering the Persian rug. She flushed deeply, realizing exactly how much force her own body had produced. Alessandro sat behind his desk, his jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up over thick, tattooed forearms. 2 crystal glasses sat beside an old bottle of bourbon. "Sit." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Mr. Marchetti, I want to apologize for the door. I know I had no right to touch that phone. If you want me to pack my things, I understand. I only ask that you find someone kind to look after Sofia." He poured 2 fingers of bourbon into each glass, slid one across the desk, and said nothing until she had lowered herself, self-consciously, into the leather chair. "Do you know what that door is made of?" "Oak, sir. Solid, reinforced oak. My men use a battering ram to get through doors like that during raids." A faint, dark amusement flickered across his features. "You went through it with your shoulder." "I threw my weight into it." Mira looked down at her lap, an old habit of self-deprecation, rising automatically to her lips. "Guess that's the one time being this size finally came in handy." Alessandro's glass came down hard against the desk, the crack of crystal against wood making her flinch. "Do not insult yourself in my presence." His voice dropped low and dangerous. "The woman who broke through that door, who stood between my daughter and that woman, who bled without asking for a single thing in return. That woman is not a punchline. Do you understand me?" Mira looked up, stunned. No one had ever spoken to her that way in her entire life. "Yes, sir. Drink your bourbon." She did, and it burned beautifully down her throat, settling the last of the tremors in her chest. Camille was never simply a fiancée. Alessandro leaned back. "Her family controls shipping contracts I needed. Marrying her was a business transaction. What I did not know," and here his voice turned to ice, "was that she had struck a secret deal with a rival family to eliminate my daughter and take control of everything that belongs to her. Tonight was not an accident. It was a test." Mira's hand flew to her mouth. "If you had not made that call," Alessandro continued, standing and rounding the desk to stop directly in front of her, "I would have come home tomorrow, to a dead child, and a grieving fiancé playing the role of a lifetime." He reached out. Mira froze as his rough, calloused fingers brushed gently against the bandage on her cheek, a touch shockingly tender for a man whose hands had done what his had done tonight. "You bled for her." His voice dropped to a low murmur. "In my world, loyalty like that is rarer than gold. I just love her, Mr. Marchetti. She's a good girl. I know you do." He stepped back, though his gaze never left her face. "Which is why, effective immediately, you are no longer staff in this house. You will be Sofia's official guardian and head of this household. You will have a private suite on the second floor, beside hers, and you will never scrub another floor in this estate as long as you live." Mira sat in stunned silence as a single tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Yes." A dangerous, satisfied smile finally touched the corner of his mouth. "Good. Now go pack your things. I have a rat to freeze." The warehouse smelled of salt and rust and old iron. Inside the industrial freezer unit, the temperature sat at 10 degrees below zero, and Camille Voss sat zip-tied to a metal chair, her platinum hair frozen stiff at the ends, her teeth chattering in a violent, uncontrollable rhythm. Alessandro stepped inside without a coat, entirely unaffected by the cold, and circled her chair slowly, his boots crunching against the frost. "Your family will renegotiate their terms by morning." His voice echoed flatly off the steel walls. "Once I explained that their daughter tried to murder mine." "They forced me," Camille sobbed. "Please, Alessandro, I'll give you anything." "You underestimated me." He crouched in front of her, his voice quiet. "But more than that, you underestimated her. You thought because a woman is soft, because she keeps her head down, that she has no spine. That woman has more courage in her bleeding fingers than you have in your entire bloodline." He stood, adjusted the collar of his shirt, and walked toward the door without looking back. "You stay in the cold. Think about what that feels like." 6 months changed everything inside the Marchetti estate. Camille Voss was quietly erased from Boston society entirely, her family's shipping contracts absorbed into Alessandro's empire without a single shot fired in the light of day. The rival family behind the plot found their own operation systematically dismantled within weeks. But the most startling change was the woman standing at Alessandro's side. Mira Ellison ruled the household now, not with cruelty, but with a quiet, unshakable strength that made the entire staff answer to her without question. Sofia's asthma attacks became a distant memory. The silent, hollowed-out little girl, who used to hide inside curtains, was replaced by a laughing child who trailed Mira through the gardens, flour on her hands from baking, mud on her knees from the flower beds. And Alessandro courted Mira, not with shallow gifts, but with acts of devotion. Tailored gowns from Milan that draped over her curves instead of hiding them. A quiet, fierce reverence in the way he looked at her across a room, as if she were the only steady thing left in a world built on blood and silence. The final test came in December, during the syndicate's annual gala, when 400 of the country's most dangerous men and their glittering wives filled the estate's ballroom, whispering for months about the woman Alessandro Marchetti had chosen. When the doors opened and Mira walked in beside him in midnight velvet, her head held high, the silence that fell over the room was absolute. A rival boss stepped forward with a cruel smile, looking her up and down. "I heard you promoted the help." Mira simply smiled, calm and terrifyingly polite. "We found the previous management lacking in loyalty. I'd hate for you to suffer an unexpected freeze to your own assets." The man's face drained of color. He bowed his head and backed away without another word. Alessandro pulled her flush against his side, his hand resting possessively against the curve of her waist. "Have I told you how breathtaking you are tonight? You might have mentioned it." Mira smiled, watching Sofia wave to her from the balcony above. Safe, laughing, home. Mira Ellison had started as a ghost in this house, an invisible woman meant to scrub floors and swallow every cruelty handed to her without complaint. But she had thrown her body against a locked door, picked up a forbidden phone, and demanded that the devil himself come home. In doing so, she had not only saved a child, she had claimed a kingdom. And she knew, standing there in the candlelight, with a glass raised to a room full of dangerous men who now feared her, that she would never shrink herself again. Did this story keep you on the edge of your seat? If Mira's courage and Alessandro's ruthless devotion pulled at your heart, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next intense Mafia romance drama.